I would like to welcome our next speaker, Karrie Karahalios. She's the professor of computer science, also co-founder of the Center for People and Infrastructures at UIUC. Karrie actually spent some time here in Boston. She got a PhD here at MIT. Her work focuses on the interaction between humans and the social cues, and she's particularly interested in design analysis of social media systems, communication dynamics, and assistive technologies. So, without further ado.
Okay. So, thank you so much for having me here. I don't know if you can hear me. I'm going to start today by telling a story about how people make sense of the feeds around them. But I'm going to start first by telling a story about me and my family. So for those of you who don't know, this is a picture of a large antenna. This is a picture of a large antenna. I remember the days on Sundays when my family wanted to watch a soccer game, and my dad would be up on the roof. My brother and I would be in the basement, and he would be moving this antenna around, and we'd be screaming when we could see the soccer players like kicking the ball. When we got older, my brother and I used to go up there, and we'd point this antenna and align it with the antenna in the bank across the street, thinking that that would give us the best reception. We had no clue about how E&M worked. We had no idea, and we didn't have to. We just moved the antenna, and we got feedback. Today, people really want to understand the reception of the information they get online, but they don't know how to. For example, this is a query on mother. OK, you get a song about mother. You get a movie from 2009. This is a search from 2012. I do the same search last night in 2017. I get a different result because there's this very popular movie coming out now called Mother. One way to make sense of this feed would be to compare, but it's really hard to go back today to 2012 and see this previous view. Another example of comparison can help is in this view, and you may have seen this one before. This is a search for why Caillou is bald. On the left, the search is on the Comcast network. On the right, it's on another network. In one case, you get that he's bald because he sucks. On the other one, you get the answer that he's bald because we decided that we made him as a baby of 9 months. So we decided that he would never have any hair. And we hope this helps children understand that being different isn't just OK, it's normal. But why do you get these two different answers for the same query on two different Wi-Fi networks? I can tell you that today, you always get the answer on the right on most queries and most networks that I've tried. But a lot of this is influencing who we talk to online. These algorithms bleed into our social feeds. And this is an example of Instagram. They introduced an algorithmic feed recently. Some people love it. Some people hate it. A lot of it depends on just how much you experiment with it. Another algorithmic feed was introduced in Twitter. And here what's different is that they actually articulate it. They say, in case you missed it, you should see this. But how do they choose what you should see? And so moving right along, I'm going to tell a story about how I got interested in doing this style of work. My colleagues and I in 2012, Christian Sandvik and Kevin Hamilton, were sitting around a table trying to figure out why this parody post about a big crystal for her ball pen kept appearing on our feeds for more than 2 weeks at the very top. It made no sense. It didn't happen just to us. It happened to many people. We were reasonably intelligent. We made Facebook groups trying to figure this out. We decided we were going to reverse engineer this system and explain it to people. But as we were coming up with a really good reverse engineered system, we came across two problems as we asked people what was happening here. Number one, most people had no clue there was an algorithm behind the feed at all. In fact, one award-winning doctor at Harvard was like, why would they ever do that? It makes no sense. The second problem we encountered was that nobody wanted to use our reverse engineered system. People didn't care to know the 100+ features that went into it. They just wanted something they could relate to. So we had to go back to the drawing board and take a more human-centered approach and see what people wanted and see what people felt when they saw these and look at their reactions. So we did just that. And as we did that, one thing we discovered was that only 38% of people in the fall of 2013 and spring of 2014 were aware that there was an algorithm in their feed. The others were not aware. Of the people that were unaware, they mostly blamed themselves. They were like, I bet it would be in my news feed. I would catch it at some point. Or I just didn't scroll far enough. It was my fault. But the people who were aware became aware through folk theories. And these are the non-authoritative conceptions of the world that develop among non-professionals and circulate informally. And they help them make sense of the feed. So I'm going to explain some of the theories they had of their feed. And then I'm going to talk to you about an intervention that we did and the theories that they came up after the intervention. So the 4 theories were here, and I'm going to briefly describe them. The first is the personal engagement theory, the one where if you like and click on a person's page, for example, the more I click on it, the more of the person that I see. On the right, if I keep going to that person's page, and if I visit their page a lot, Facebook will know that I really like that person and show me more of their information. Many people felt that they would actually like their own content, and by liking their own content, it would appear on more of their friends' pages. But my favorite was the first I like it, then I hide it. So there's one person kept getting lots and lots of baby photos, and they got sick and tired of seeing baby photos. But they felt obligated to like their friends' baby photos. And so they would like them because they felt they had to, and then they would immediately go to the control panel and hide it, hoping that would counteract the weight of liking it. And they would go around like using their feed in this way, trying to manipulate the manipulation, as they called it. Another theory, as you can imagine, is the global population theory. This one got 1.9 million likes. It was basically an ice bucket challenge. People felt that if lots of people like something, it'll show up on more people's feeds. The narcissist theory was that you see lots and lots of lots of posts from people that are like you. For example, they might have the same last name as you. You might have the same mutual friends. They might like the same things and share the same things as you. And then there's the format theory. And the format theory argued that there's certain things that you get shared more, whether they be photos, whether they be text, or whether they be movies. And one person was so adamant that whenever he wrote something in text, that got shared more than anything that had a video or anything that had an image. And yet, another person, she thought that whenever she had like a lolcat, whenever she had like a funny animated GIF, that always got shared. What was really interesting about these theories was that they all had a format theory, but it was not universal. Everyone's was different. And by saying this, I'm going to digress for a second and talk about the work of this gentleman named Kempton and how he studied thermostats. So he studied thermostats in the 80s. And what he did is he interviewed lots of people about how they used their thermostats, and he kept logs of their thermostat use. And what he found was that people primarily fell into 2 categories. They thought that the thermostat worked as a switch or feedback. The temperature got too low, it clicked on, it warmed up your house, or a valve, like water. So you turn it up, and more heat comes out. He interviewed them, he looked at their usage patterns, and what he found was regardless of which theory they had, and I should mention that experts believe almost universally that the switch or feedback theory is correct, it didn't matter what theory they had. What mattered was that they had a theory and that both theories had advantages and disadvantages, but by having the feedback, they were able to make what worked for them. And so in that, we decided to borrow from his work and make our own feedback for the system by embracing what's called seamful technologies. But let me explain what that means first. This here is an example of what I would argue is seamless technology. It's an orbits page. You put in your origin, your destination. It spits out exactly where you want your flights, and you just look at them, and you're done. And many would argue that this is the epitome of design, that by not understanding, not seeing anything under the hood, that we've succeeded in a nice, polished design that gets us exactly what we want without extra cognitive overload. However, this was great until somebody discovered that if you used a Mac, your prices were higher than if you used a PC or if you used a Linux box. And that led people to embrace seamful design. And I never thought 10 years ago I would be embracing this site. But this idea of providing seams and providing some content about the origin of the information inspires trust in people. So like I said, we borrowed from this and created an interface called FeedViz. And we brought the same participants and we interviewed them about how they viewed their feeds by looking at this algorithmic probe that we created. There was a narrative visualization that we took them through this story. So the first thing that they saw, as you can see here on the left, these are posts that are sent by every single person on their network. On the right are only the Facebook posts that they actually see on their feed. And you can see another view of that here. So at first glance, anything that's white was missing. And for most people, this was the first time they realized that there was actually an algorithm behind their feed. They had not realized this before. And they also realized that the stream on the left was 3 times as long as the stream on the right. As they were doing this, they were telling us stories about what they were experiencing. But for the people who were unaware, they felt that it was intense because it felt like the Matrix. It's kind of like waking up in the Matrix in a way. I mean, you have what you think of as reality and like what they choose to show you. And they got angry and they were swearing. And one person just quit Facebook on the spot and walked out. But I want to stress that this was just an initial reaction. The thing that struck most with me was the expectations that they had and how this affected relationships. This person said, I think she needs support for that, mentioned pointing to a post that was not shown. If I see it, then I will say something to support her. And people were saying that this affected their friendships, like not having seen that. And they realized for the first time that, my God, I stopped talking to her because she didn't like this or didn't support me, not realizing they may not have seen that post at all. And so it made them reevaluate and address the misperceptions they had in their feed and think about their expectations. The next thing we did, like the first view I showed you was a content view. This is more of a people view. So on the left, the red are people whose posts you almost never see. On the right is people whose posts you mostly see. And in the middle are people whose posts you see roughly half of the time. And you can refresh this, and then you can see more and more people, and you're like, oh my God, I don't see any posts of these people in the left-hand column at all. Like, why is that? One person realized it's because they actually blocked them a long time ago and forgot. But there were many other folk theories they were coming up with along the way, and people got viscerally upset if a family member was in the left two columns and not in the right-hand column. So after this, we revisited our folk theories and looked at what folk theories came up afterwards. So both the aware and the unaware folks came up with the exact same folk theories just by participating in the probe. But they added 6 more. And I'm not going to go through all of them in the interest of time. But I'm going to talk about 2 of them. The first one is the eye of providence theory. And this is the one where they think that Facebook is all omniscient to the extent that it even goes outside of Facebook. There could be keywords that Facebook is taught to look for, and it shows that information. This got filtered because it's highly saturated in government and politics, and they know that people don't want to see politics. Facebook tracks outward links for following, so they realized they thought that it looked outside of Facebook. Someone went so far as to say that it tracked their phone calls and their presence in brick-and-mortar stores. Some people said Facebook removes low-quality content, whether it be low resolution or just bad writing or something that is too long and has been shared already too many times. The other prominent theory was the control panel theory, which is also a very logical one. Basically, people use their control panels and they see what they see because of what they said in the control panels. And this was, by seeing this view, they remembered what they had said in their control panels because they had forgotten before. Following this, we actually had a debrief where we actually had people just see how good their feed was. So in this case, we had them move people from one column to the next if they thought they should be rarely seen to the mostly seen. Or we had them look at their content. So of the posts that they'd seen, we asked them to mark the ones that they did not want to see. And of the ones that they did not see, we asked them to mark the ones that they did want to see. And right around this point, people are like, wow, it's actually pretty good. I don't know why I got so upset in the first place. They're like, honestly, I have nothing to change, which I'm surprised, because I came in like, they're screwing it all, and this is terrible. And it was through this process of actually understanding it and understanding why they did it. And they began to use inductive and deductive reasoning to see that there's no way I can see all these 3,000 points in one day. Actually, this algorithm is helping me. But how can I use it to help me more? But then that led us to the question, like, are these theories useful? And so it turned out, of all the theories people came up with, only 2 of them are useful. The personal engagement theory and the control panel theory, because these were the only 2 theories that they could act on. They could actually do something to influence them. They felt like you could prod the algorithm along, and actually, again, the word manipulate the manipulation came up a lot. But they wanted more actionable ways to control their feed, and they couldn't do that. For example, they wanted to tune it in ways that wasn't possible. One person said that, oh my God, my husband saw my feed, and he thought it was the most boring, lame feed he'd ever seen. How do I revert it back to my 2014 feed as opposed to what it is today? There's no tuning mechanism available for us to do that. But how do we move forward to embrace folk theories? One approach is algorithm probes like the one we showed and like the ones that were shown by the Google team earlier today to poke and to prod. One thing I want to stress is that a lot of the things that we saw earlier today are amazing tools to be used from the inside, like looking at our data sets, making sure that we understand that we have representative training sets. But my talk is really more about how to make information to help people probe from the outside. And so for that, it would be really, really helpful to have APIs to let third parties be able to build some tools around these to the extent that it's legally and ethically possible. One thing I also want to stress is seamful interfaces. How do we learn to create interfaces that generate actionable folk theories? It's really, really hard. We're doing it, we're making some progress, and it's fascinating to see how people control their inputs as they do it. And then this idea of further tuning to revert. Like I showed you earlier, this example of the search for mother, and how do I go back to the 2012 result versus the 2017 result if I don't care about that one movie? And so again, this is one example of a seamful interface. This was super, super popular across designers and design schools and design practice, informatics programs, computer science programs. Unfortunately, when the API was deprecated, it stopped working. We could have continued it if we'd chosen to violate terms of service. We chose not to. But there's still demand for it, and people keep asking for it. In fact, what was really interesting to me was this idea that people in other countries wanted to use it to see if they found the same results and same folk theories in South Korea or China, and how do we set it up there? China wasn't really viable, but South Korea, we teamed up with them. This other interface looks at communicating algorithms through design. So for example, this was built by the brilliant Eric Gilbert. This was part of his dissertation. So if you look at here, the typography changes. The typography emphasizes some level of importance when the text is bigger versus smaller, and that has to do with the social zooming. So for example, you move that bar to the top, it emphasizes people you're close to. You move it to the bottom, the outer circle, it emphasizes people you're less close to. The control panels are easy to see, easy to observe. People can compare easily. And the one thing I'm just going to end my talk right here and see if we have time for questions. But one thing I want to stress is a quote I really loved from Richard Dyer in his book about racial bias in film technology. And it applies beyond that. It's that all technologies are at once technical and also always social, whether it be economic, cultural, or ideological. So I'm so excited that Google is embracing the social part of technology. Thank you.
Thanks, Karrie. We have some time for questions.